Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Hello, I'm so glad you can join us. Whether you're an old friend or new to the show, if you're interested in the latest evolutionary knowledge from today's leading experts, Mission Evolution is the place to be. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour, we'll discuss whether Earth is just a chunk of rock or an evolving sentient being. When I was in college working on a Bachelor of Science, the view being taught was that everything was random with no meaning. The Earth was just a chunk of rock, and we started at birth, ended at death with no purpose or significance in between. End of story. If one believed in spirituality or life after death, they were considered uneducated, superstitious fools. Fortunately, these views are evolving, if a bit slowly. What are the new thoughts on life, death, purpose, and the universe? Do they add meaning to our existence? Is there any science upholding them? With us this hour to examine our evolving universe is an old dear friend, Jude Currivan. Jude is a cosmologist, planetary healer, futurist, and the author of Cosmic Hologram and her latest, The Story of Gaia. Co-founder of WholeWorld-View, she's experienced multidimensional reality since childhood, holds a Ph.D. in Archaeology and a master's degree in physics from Oxford University, specializing in cosmology and quantum physics. Her work integrates leading-edge science and universal wisdom teachings to support the evolution of consciousness. Her website, WholeWorld-View.org. Jude, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Gwilda, it's wonderful to be with you again. I remember the last time we were together a few years ago, we were exploring the cosmic hologram. So now we've moved forward 4 years and everything's moved forward 4 years. And we're here to explore, as you say, the story of Gaia and the story of our planetary home. So thank you again.
Oh, my pleasure to have you. It's just wonderful. Here you are in England and I am in Colorado and the studio's in Canada and we're kind of spread across Gaia, aren't we?
We sure are.
Yeah. So Jude, you your educational background in archaeology and physics. Why did you become interested in cosmology? Why did you add that in there?
Basically, because since I was a very young child, I experienced reality in multidimensional ways. So I was sort of walking between worlds as a child and realizing that what we experience in this realm of being is just one of a huge, vast, grand, cosmic reality. And so my journey, and that's been the journey all my life, but because I was curious about that nature of reality, what cosmology does is it tries to explore the most fundamental way of reality. Now, most cosmologists look at the physical world, but me, from my journey right from the beginning, it was more a journey into consciousness and how consciousness and cosmic consciousness co-created what we call our universe. So that really got me into cosmology more from an experiential viewpoint. And then studying the science, helped me to understand how all of that starts to come together and why and how, but primarily to really serve the evolution of consciousness. My sense that we're all awakening to something that is greater than we are.
So you came in actually from kind of an esoteric standpoint before you even started your education, didn't you? And then you're searching for, okay, what's the science behind it and how far has the science gone and where can we take this?
Absolutely. And the science when I was growing up hadn't got very far because although, of course, at the beginning of the 20th century, we had the quantum pioneers, we had Einstein and relativity, which were uncovering deep clues to this deeper reality. Those deeper clues were sort of pushed to the side and the focus then became on technologies. What could this science develop in terms of technologies rather than the deeper, philosophical understanding of what it was telling us.
And now we've ridden technology right to the edge and we're having fun with
Oh,
it, but it's a challenge. so
boy, have
Jude,
we.
you speak of the earth as Gaia. Would you tell us why?
Yeah, well, first of all, the word Gaia is a name, and it was the name that the ancient Greeks gave to the earth goddess. And then back in the sort of 70s, 80s, a pioneering scientist called James Lovelock came up with the Gaia hypothesis. And what he was doing, he was looking at what supports biological life in a planetary home. And clearly our planetary home does support biological life. But he was actually working, I think, for NASA at the time, and they wanted to see whether Mars could support biological life. And what he realized is there were certain signatures in atmospheres, in the geology of a planet, but primarily in the atmosphere, as to whether that atmosphere was active and included gases that would be indicative of biological life. But what he did, that journey then took him deeper into the understanding of our planetary home. And he started to realize, and he wouldn't, I think, go as far as to say that our planet is sentient, but he realized that our planetary home exists and evolves as a planetary system. In other words, we can't sort of separate a region here from a region there. We can't separate an atmosphere from waters, from geology, or from the biological life of the biosphere. So he came up with this, and he called it the Gaia hypothesis. Now, what we've discovered in the years since, and what I write about in the Story of Gaia, goes much, much, much further, because it talks about the latest evidence, not just for Gaia being conscious, being sentient, but our entire universe being sentient.
And that's kind of diametrically opposed to where science went, because science went to the place of taking things apart.
Yeah,
Even our
exactly.
medicine, we look at the liver, or we look at the lungs, or you know,
Exactly.
they
Exactly.
interface. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So why do you state that? I can see the interrelatedness, and I can
Yes.
see how everything's interrelated. As above, so below. From our cellular level right down to the molecular level, we've got these little planets spinning that create our body, and I can see how that would go outward. But now you're talking about sentience. You're talking about Earth as a sentient being. Would you
Mhm.
go into that a little bit? What do you mean by that?
I'd love to. Well, certainly, and this is the evidence that I share in the Story of Gaia. Our stories aren't just about us. They go back as long as we've got a memory of being able to go back. And one of the things that the technologies of the 20th and 21st century have enabled us to do is look further out in the universe than ever before, and at smaller scales than ever before. And from those sort of the very large and the very small, we've come every scale into the level of our lived experience, and realized that the appearance of our universe is not its fundamental reality, that its appearance of energy and matter and space and time actually emerge from deeper non-physical levels of causation. And the way they do that is they do that sort of expressed as meaningful information. So when I speak of this, I put a little hyphen, a little dash between the in and the formation, because this digitized information, literally from the smallest, most fundamental aspects of our universe to the whole universe, expresses itself as atoms, molecules, up to planets and plants and people, up to the whole universe. And what we found is the same patterns, the same signatures of this meaningful, informational relationships at every scale, including the scale of human collective behavior. So this isn't something that's out there or of interest just to scientists. This could herald a complete revolution of our perception of ourselves and our relationships with each other, as well as Gaia, as well as with the entire whole world. And what it's showing us, therefore, is that it's mind and consciousness that's fundamental, that's not just primary, but literally all that is. And this, of course, is what universal wisdom teachings have taught us for millennia.
It's amazing to go full circle, isn't it? We're just about ready for a break, but you opened up all sorts of little rabbit holes I'd love to go into after we take the commercial break. One of them, of course, is information. I think that's a huge piece. And another one is you talked about mind as well as consciousness. And so I'd love to discern those two. Do you have a quick explanation of that one?
Yeah, what my dear friend Dr. Professor Max Vellman says, the differentiation is that mind can be eternal, infinite. Consciousness is where that ocean becomes a thought, becomes an awareness. So it's as though the mind is the ocean, the waves are consciousness.
Oh, love it. Love it. Well, it is that magic moment for us to take a station break. Jude and I will return very shortly, so don't go away. It's just starting to get interesting here. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Hello again. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. With us this hour discussing Earth as a living being is Jude Currivan. Her website, WholeWorld-View.org. I'll get that one right yet, Jude. So you tickled my fancy with speaking of information. We think of the information highway, we think of the internet, we think of,
Sure.
what you're talking about in a different way. Well, what do you mean by information and how does it apply here?
Gwilda, I'm not so sure it is that different. I mean, the information that underpins all our communication technologies is digitized information. It's whole strings of ones and zeros. And when those strings are unraveled, they form an image, they form a sound, just as we're communicating. And our folks that are tuning into us are doing so through technologies that are based on information. And it's not random data, it's meaningful information. It's an information that makes up an image of Gwilda. It's information that makes up the words I'm speaking, unless they're completely nonsense, which they might be, but hopefully not. So I put that little dash, that hyphen, to be the difference between meaningless and meaningful information. And our universe is all pervasive with meaningful information. So when we go back to the very beginning of space and time, we actually find that our universe is as simple as it can be, but no simpler. But the actual information that's embodied in the laws of physics, for example, which are like instructions for a universe, are so related and so fine-tuned and so ordered that they literally set off in that first moment, 13.8 billion years ago, this universal journey from simplicity to ever greater complexity, and this evolutionary journey that's then held ever more in formation within its experience of evolution. So that's what I mean by information. And it's exactly the same ones and zeros, but instead of just making up a whole line of ones and zeros, which is an audible sound, they literally inform all of the formation of our universe. And we have an enormous amount of evidence now that's showing that underpins all we call reality.
So there's talk now of the unified field. And when you're speaking of us all being connected to the universe, to the earth itself, and to each other, is that what you're talking about? And if so, what exactly is the unified field?
Well, again, this is evidence-led. We've got a theoretical framework now, or progressively so. And that's been part of my work, to put the evidence and the framework together. But what we've got the evidence for at all scales of existence is that our entire universe does indeed exist and evolve as what's called a non-locally unified entity. Now, what I mean by that is the quantum pioneers realized when they started to try and do what you'd said earlier about take things apart and see what they look like, they realized they couldn't. That when we go down to the deeper level of reality, you can't take things apart. You never can. The appearance of separation is of itself an illusion. Reality is real, but separation is not. So when they went deeper, they realized that for what they were discovering required not just that inseparability at very small scales, but to work at all, it required our entire universe to be inseparable and non-locally connected. And we've now in 2018, a set of researchers at MIT were able to prove this, to show evidence for this, by what's called non-locally entangling some photons of light in their laboratory with starlight from 600 light years away, with light from a very active galactic center called a quasar, 12.2 billion light years away. So by that stage, we're talking about a very, very good evidence that our entire universe is non-locally, fundamentally one, unified. And that's what really this understanding of unified reality is about.
Well, our reality heretofore has been built on contrast. Like if you take a photograph, if you don't have contrast, you don't have a picture. Okay.
Absolutely.
And yet contrast can also be seen as taking things apart, black and white. What is it going to take? You know, because when we talk about this stuff, I know my eyes cross sometimes. It's like,
What?
exactly. You say
Absolutely.
what? I can't wrap my head around that. So what is it going to take for your average individual to be able to start make sense of this and to decode it so that they can incorporate it into their view of reality and expand their perceptions?
That is a perfect question, and it's a fundamental question. I think two responses to that. First of all, unity is not uniformity. It is unity expressed as radical diversity. I mean, when we see the diversity that every single snowflake is different, every leaf on every tree is different, every human being is different, we now know that there are probably more planets in our galaxy than there are stars. Yeah? And think of the hundreds of billions of galaxies. So there are probably trillions of planets. Everyone is different. And yet they're all part of this unity, unified reality. So what does that mean when we have the evidence for this, that unity differentiates itself? As you say, it contrasts light and shadow. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to experience it. Without, as the I Ching said, the one becomes the two becomes three. From the three, 10,000 things are born. So unity expresses itself in that diversity of 10,000 things, but it is ultimately inseparable. Now, how can we help folks to feel that in their own lives? I think that is, honestly, it's a journey for each and all of us. Because I think that, you know, we now have the evidence that this is so. It's coming more and more into the mainstream. The latest 2 Nobel Prizes for physics have been to a gentleman called Alan Aspect and a gentleman called Anton Zeilinger, who come from this perspective of non-local universality. 2 Nobel Prizes. Yeah, it's great.
That's impressive. Yeah.
I know. So the evidence is becoming more and more and more compelling. And the evidence is also showing, crucially, that this unity in diversity is expressed through us. It's part of our lived experience, our lives. So the question then is, how can we bring this new understanding, this unitive, ancient understanding into our educational systems, into our healthcare systems, into our organizations? And I think that there are many, many voices that can do this. I think it's a combination of teaching, of expression, of all of this, and also through the arts. But ultimately, it comes back to how we experience reality. And our worldviews drive our behaviors. and our experiences. So if we have a worldview of separation, we have a worldview essentially of suffering. So it seems to be
doesn't
of all of
doesn't
us
our
help to bring people home.
doesn't our worldview and our belief systems dictate our reality? I mean, there's been all sorts of evidence that you can have something right in front of you, and if
Sure,
it's not in your belief system, you
absolutely.
don't see it.
You
You
don't
don't
see it.
see it at all. And then the other question I have is, not to get off topic, but I think it applies, is everybody's looking for the wrecked spaceship in Roswell, okay? Judging it by the way things would manifest physically in our reality, not just on our planet, but in our reality.
Sure.
Are we missing the boat as far as extraterrestrials and other intelligence and other life out there and within our planet itself?
I think we have been to a great degree. I mean, the whole thing is our worldview of materialism and separation has shut us down from so much, as you say. So as we begin to open, to wake up, really, to wake up to realize we're inseparable, and to wake up to realize that we're not the only game in town when it comes to sort of the universe's evolutionary impulse. If we are realizing, which we now are, that there are probably more planets than stars in our universe, think of the vast opportunity for life, biological life, because I'm describing life as our entire universe. But for biological life forms such as ourselves to have evolved. And many of my colleagues and yours around the world, are in communication with beings, whether they are discarnate beings or incarnate beings. I think we're on the threshold of remembering who we really are, and that includes the extraterrestrial communities of our universe.
It's just a fascinating topic. I think that we're all kind of coming at it from different angles, but
Yeah.
eventually it's on a collision course when we realize we are the aliens we seek.
Yes.
Yeah, pretty fascinating stuff. So it's time for another station break. On the other side, June and I are going to continue this fascinating discussion. So you stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Hello again. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're bringing you the latest information to assist your evolutionary process. With us discussing the evolutionary nature of the universe is Dr. Jude Currivan. Her website, WholeWorld-View.org. Jude, I wanted to get into cycles. So
Mhm.
we were heretofore talking about how information starts small and it keeps building, and pretty soon we're expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding, and building it on itself. But if we look, I think that everything in nature tends to reflect everything, period. And I always look to nature as my litmus test. But
Mm.
nature runs in cycles. Granted, it's a bit of a spiral in that we have winter, spring, summer, fall every year, but they vary every year. How do cycles fit in with the view of this expansion that you've been talking about?
Well, if we go to the whole universe, let's think big here. Let's go to the whole universe. And the universe began 13.8 billion years ago in its most minute form. But it didn't begin in the implied chaos of what we call the Big Bang. It wasn't big, and it wasn't a bang in that sense. Instead, it was the first moment of an ongoing big breath. And so space has expanded ever since that first moment of space and time has flowed forward. We've been able, that the whole universe has embodied ever more complexity. So it's evolved from simplicity to complexity. And over the first 9 billion years or so, it was moving from atoms of hydrogen, eventually into stars, eventually into the alchemy, the alchemical, reactions within stars that came, that created more and more complex elements to all the natural elements that we see throughout the universe. Each generation of stars, and they were cycles of stars, as you suggest, each generation of stars in that period of time was born, evolved like we do. Stars evolve. So they burn through their hydrogen fuel to create these heavier and more complex elements. And then the really large ones at the end of their lives, many of them explode. Now that again is not really chaotic, because in that explosion, all that abundance, the elemental abundance, gets thrown out into the interstellar medium. And 9 billion years ago, 5 billion years ago, 9 billion years into this long story, this universal story, interstellar clouds of gas and dust were forming. And by that stage, they also included ice. So you had ice and you had all these complex elements and prebiotic molecules. So these interstellar clouds were like creches, they were like wombs for planetary systems. So cycles of stars then came to that point. Then what happened is our planetary system was born through the explosive death of a nearby star whose shock waves literally shocked what became us, our cloud, into our planetary system. And so more cycles began to form. This time they were cycles of planets in orbits around our sun. This time our planet, Gaia, was born as a water planet, exactly the right distance from our star to be able to have liquid water and then to nurture the emergence of biological life forms. But the earliest prebiotic molecules were already present in those clouds before our system was even born. So we then go into Gaia's cycles, and her cycles are long-lived. Over hundreds of thousands of years, her orbit slightly changes, her tilt on her axis slightly changes, she wobbles on her axis. All of that brings those cycles of seasons, those cycles of hotter and colder, into her experience and her continuing evolution. And what that does is it enables more abundance of different environmental opportunities. So we get more and more cycles that then themselves nurture cycles of biological evolution. And again, from single-celled to us.
So if we're to embrace this, which is very large, I might have to tell you, if we're to embrace this, won't it change the way we view the cycles that we're subject to? Because it seems like we resist our cycles. Birth is lovely, death is not so good. Youth is lovely, growing old is not so good. Acquiring is great, letting go of, not so much. We resist the cycles, just even in the little ones in our experience. If we start to embrace the larger view, will it help us embrace the cycles we live in and help us prosper at any level?
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree it will. I mean, although indigenous teachings didn't have the technology to reach to the edge of the universe or dig down into atomic scales, indigenous teachings show us that we're all part of a web of life, and therefore the cycles of life are natural aspects of our meaning, are the meaning of our existence, the purpose of our existence and evolution. And I think the other thing that you mentioned just there is a lot of our distress comes from a perception that we are separate, from each other, from our planetary home, from our universe. And that greater perception of separation is that when our physical bodies come to the end of this life, this earth walk, that our consciousness dies with us. And more evidence is showing that that too is not the case. So if we can lose the fear of death because we know we continue, if we can lose the fear of security and all the rest of it, of scarcity, because we know we're inseparable and we act as though we're inseparable, and yet our unity is expressed in diversity, everything changes. Everything changes in the way we see ourselves, each other, Gaia, the whole world.
And we live in fear when we're in the old way, and that shuts down 3/4 of our resources, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we know now, again, part of this leading edge evidence is showing exactly as you say, the innate interconnectivity between our minds, our emotions, our bodies, because we're all mind, but the way we think, the way we feel are intrinsically connected with our physicality. My dear friend Elizabeth Sartoris talks about the piano keyboard of consciousness, and that goes from the perception of physicality all the way up to the highest vibrations of spiritual perception. We're all of it, and we can play all of it. And when we realize we're all of it, what adventures calls us.
You said something that I'd like to get into a little bit deeper here in the time we have left in this segment. And you said that the ancients didn't have science and the ability to get the evidence from the universe like we do. But there is esoteric evidence that they absolutely did, that
Yeah.
they used that very connectivity to access the information for the Mayan calendar, say, for instance. The Mayan calendar is built on the cycles within cycles within cycles, that the only way you could find them is
Yeah.
to go out into the universe.
Yeah.
So have we not, through science and through technology, replicated that which we already are?
I think to some degree we have, but I also feel that rather than just seeing this as cycles, let's perhaps consider it as spirals. And you're absolutely right. When we look to the ancient Egyptians, the Chinese, the Vedic sages of ancient India, absolutely, theirs was a sacred science, and theirs ultimately was a science of consciousness. And so in that regard, we're rediscovering a lot of what they actually understood. What I would say is that there's also an evolutionary process here, because to my understanding, they saw the Mayans perhaps differently, but certainly the further back we go, the cycles were there, but the evolutionary progress was not something that they brought that clearly into their perception. And I feel now, perhaps for the first time in our journey as human beings, that we are at a point not so much of a biological evolution, but of conscious evolution as a collective, as a species.
And as we do that, don't you see, or do you see science as we know it now and the science of consciousness coming together to create something new, something larger, something more expansive?
Oh, yes, very much so. This convergence of leading edge science at all scales and across many fields of research is absolutely converging with universal wisdom teachings. And in a way, they're coming together to form this transcendent, new and unitive narrative, which can underpin and frame us in taking our next steps forward in conscious evolution. And it's this sort of unitive narrative that I think when we bring that into the way we educate our children, the way we bring that understanding into all the aspects of our lived lives, personally and collectively, that is transformational.
And that's what we have to do at this point, really, to start to embrace these more expansive concepts, is to uneducate ourselves, to you know what I mean by that, to deprogram what's been put in there by
Absolutely.
the systems.
Absolutely. And also realize that this is of itself evolutionary. This of itself is a work, inevitably a work in progress. And
Absolutely.
so,
We're going.
aligning and attuning with that is how we show up and get out of the way of the universe's
Well, we're
evolutionary
going to
process.
have to take another station break, but please stay with us. Jude and I continue to explore this conscious evolution of humanity as part of Gaia's evolutionary process. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Welcome back. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org, your source of information and support while we're navigating our rapidly evolving world. With us this hour is our expert guest, Dr. Jude Currivan. Her website, WholeWorld-View.org. Jude, as promised for our listeners and our viewers, I wanted to get into, we talk about the consciousness of human beings evolving with the consciousness of the planet.
Mm.
That's pretty interesting concept. How how is that happening? How is the consciousness of the planet evolving, and how are we related to that?
Well, perhaps we can go back to the birthing of our planetary home, Gaia Gwilda, as part of this planetary system. And everywhere we look, we see relationships that are underpinning sort of resonances and dynamic processes of information. The whole journey is continuing from simplicity to complexity. So when Gaia, as a planetary home, came into being, she already had this completely interconnectedness between her atmosphere, her waters, and her rocks and minerals. And very early now, we know, after she came into being, the conditions enabled her to become a planetary mother of biological organisms. And from the very simplest, over the last sort of 4 billion years, they've evolved to us. Now, the point of that is there is a realization that every time that simplicity moves into ever more complex forms, it does so through cooperation. We have her entire journey has been through what we call collaboration. There have been sort of competitive tensions, but there's always been cooperation whenever there's been a move forward in complexity. So we're now at a position, after all that time, that we've been in this worldview of separation. So we've been, relatively competitive with each other. And that worldview of separation has driven so much of the traumas and the suffering we have in the world. Gaia and we cannot be separated. Her sentience and ours cannot be separated. A dear friend of mine's named Michael Lindfield. And what he talks about is us waking up to remember we are Gaians. More than human beings, we're Gaians. And so our relationship with her is not just that she's our primary mother and the reverence we owe her, the love we owe her for the love and care she gives us, but realizing that if we can wake up to this expanded awareness of who we really are, it's rather like a child and a mother. A child grows up, they get the sort of terrible teens. We've been terrible teens. If we can move into a greater level of maturity, we can heal our relationship with her and all her children, but we can actually become, and Charles Eisenstein talks about this, more lovers, more co-evolutionary partners on this ongoing evolutionary journey. That, it seems to me, is our opportunity. But it's founded in we're not separate. And
quite an opportunity. You mentioned that when the soup of creation was being formed, that it involved stars dying and exploding into different forms. And we also talked about how there's cycles within cycles within cycles, and the same principles apply from the tiniest to the largest.
Yeah.
That being the case, the upheaval that we're experiencing right now is a bit unprecedented. Is that part of an explosion? What's going on?
I think that's a dying paradigm. I think that's a dying level of collective awareness. I think, the conflicts, the continuing inequalities, all the suffering that we spoke very briefly about, for me, are examples of our unhealed psyche. They're coming from this continuing perception that we're separate. And yet, in the midst of that dying, there's also a birthing, it seems to me, that more and more people are waking up and realizing that we are inseparable and appreciating our unity, not just in diversity and inclusion, but a wider sense of belonging, a realization that we belong with each other, with Gaia, and the whole universe.
What I find interesting is the more that wake up and hold the paradigm, hold that reality, the more disintegration happens in our old way. And that's destructive because it needs to evolve. So things need to go back to their constituent parts.
Yeah.
How can we give people hope during this process? Because it's intense.
Oh, it is intense. And I wouldn't sort of try and skate over that at all. But I think your point was absolutely the right one. The more that we do wake up, each and every one of us, answers that wake-up call, and we do, because there are wake-up calls in every way throughout life, then we are greater than the sum of our parts. And the point is of a whole awareness is more than a fragmented awareness. It's like there's more energy in the light than there is in the dark, if that's an appropriate metaphor. So the more we do wake up, the more some people call it raise our vibration collectively, then the more the old can fall away, less in its destruction, more in a hospice way. It can go quietly into the night.
Well, right now it's kicking and screaming, Jude.
Yeah, it's kicking and screaming. But rather than conflict with it, Buckminster Fuller said, it will not work that way. What we can do is sing a better song. And what we're sharing tonight is not just hope, it's authentic hope, because it's based on reality.
And I love the way it's based on the ancient teachings as well as the current science. I mean, coming at it from both angles, to me, is the answer, because people can really wrap their heads around that, even if they can't get the total ancient teachings, or they can't totally get the advanced sciences. When they come together, it starts to make just common sense. And I think people need more common sense in the world.
I love the fact that common sense isn't as common as we'd hope it would be, but I feel that, absolutely. And, the other way as well is when we really do have a moment to take a breath, to calm down. Often, if we're out in nature, if we're with Gaia, she has all the answers. She has all the answers.
That she does.
And if we
It
can
always
just go
has.
out, and always has, if we can just go outside, sit on a piece of grass, be with a plant, be with a tree, look at the sky, look at a sunrise, look at a moonset, just be with her and that beautiful cosmos of which we're all a part, the answers come.
It's amazing. It's larger than we are, and there's that information again. If we can align with nature, with Gaia, with the universe, then that information comes to us rather than us trying to have to figure it out and argue over it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it's universal. I've traveled to over 80 countries and many, 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 many different cultures, but there are universal values. And the deepest one is our need for meaning. And this is offering us meaning and purpose. In an old paradigm was of a meaningless and purposeless universe. This is of a universe that exists meaningfully and evolves purposefully. And we're part of it. We're an intrinsic part of it.
And it takes us back to the question, is it a rock floating in a random space, or I like the other alternative. Jude, it's that time in the program when I get to ask you, what is your mission?
Oh my gosh. I wear a mission very lightly, but if I was to say something, I would say to serve the conscious evolution of humanity, and not just for humanity's sake, but for Gaia's evolutionary progress, for the evolutionary impulse that our universe has embodied for 13.8 billion years to us. Aren't we privileged? So for us to actually wake up and serve that ongoing impulse through our own conscious evolution, that is what I serve. That is what my mission is.
Oh, that's beautiful, Jude. That's beautiful and so needed. So needed. So what is your vision for the future if more people do embrace the concept of a conscious, evolving planet and universe?
Do you know, I feel as though I'm like when I was 3 years old, and I was standing outside the school gates, and I looked at, and I had no idea what was awaiting me. If I see our whole human species, it's like we're 3-year-olds in a universe. And what miracles, what wonder, what expanded abilities that we have innately as microcosmic co-creators of our universe and potential co-evolutionary partners with Gaia. For me, it's the most marvelous vision that I can't even put words to, but my heart is calling me there.
It goes back to be ye as little children, doesn't it? That innocence.
Yeah.
Well, Jude, unfortunately, we are out of time. It's gone so quickly. We have to get you back on the show again. And thanks for coming back to join us.
Thank you, Gwilda. Anytime, my dear. Anytime. Thank you.
Our guest this hour has been Dr. Jude Currivan. Jude is an archaeologist, physicist, and the author of The Cosmic Hologram and The Story of Gaia. Her website, WholeWorld-View, see, I did it again, WholeWorld-View.org. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to visit past archived episodes, visit missionevolution.org. And please be sure to join us right here next time as this vital mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to our rapidly evolving world.